A Russian general has been assassinated in Moscow. This is the second time that's happened in just a number of months. You may recall back on the 17th of December of this past year, another Russian general was assassinated. That in that particular case, it was by a scooter bomb, sort of making an IED that was left outside of his door. And when he came out, somebody set it off and it went off. And we actually had the Ukraine special services admit to that one later on. But so far that the Russians have not, ironically, didn't make a big issue of it. They weren't happy about it, and they claimed that they were going to do something in retaliation at some point, but nothing specifically was ever done, which really kind of distinguishes Russia a little bit from the West, because obviously if something like that were to happen in Washington, D.C., where a U.S. general was assassinated, I mean, we'd just lose it. We'd be looking at bombing some country or whatever. But the Russians seem to be a little bit more, well, actually a lot more measured in their responses and their reactions. They do things, but oftentimes, unlike us, we like to do things flashy and make big responses. The Russians will oftentimes have patience. They will wait, and then they'll strike when people doesn't get a lot of headlines and stuff. So I'm not sure that a lot of the people who may have perpetrated these should sleep very soundly for a long time, because Russia almost always eventually gets their man. But now here we have another one, and this one is a little bit more problematic, I have to say, because of the timing that it's coming in. On the same day that Steve Witkoff is in Moscow for what may be some of the final negotiations between President Trump and President Putin on what they're going to agree on in terms of this end of war negotiations. That happens on the heel of it in Moscow. So I don't think that that's something that we should take too lightly or just let bypass, that it was just a coincidence, because we've seen many times that Zelensky, for many weeks now, has been, actually you can say many months now, has been doing everything he can, it seems, not to agree with something that Trump is doing. We had, of course, the infamous explosion in February in the Oval Office. Then it thought, okay, well, the whole purpose of that was to sign a minerals agreement. That's why they were there. The instrument was there. The pens were there. They were supposed to have just a happy talk with the cameras in. They were supposed to go sign it. To this day, that still hasn't been signed. It's something still on the table. It was supposed to be done again later. That wasn't happened then either. Then Zelensky goes on 60 Minutes, and he trashes both the president and the vice president, accuses them both of being basically stooges of Moscow, saying that they have been succumbed to the propaganda that Moscow is putting out there. And that's what they're talking about. Then he says that Trump's chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff, is unqualified for the position to even have an opinion on the matter, much less to actually qualify. Those are things that he keeps saying in public, while Trump continues going down the path of trying to find a negotiated settlement. Now, then we have at the beginning of this week, we have you had the Secretary of State and the Vice President both make different statements, very emphatic. We are at the final stages here. We're going to make a very clear offer to a deal. And if people don't accept it, if everybody doesn't accept it, we're ready to walk away. And now then there's been lots of pressure on Zelensky to agree to the U.S. side of it. Now, this also goes back even to the ceasefire agreement, the 30-day ceasefire that we were trying to get, that the Russians wouldn't agree to a full ceasefire, but they would agree to a energy infrastructure ceasefire on the both sides' energy infrastructure, or on the Black Sea deal. Those were allegedly put into effect, but nobody kept them. The Ukraine claimed that Russia violated in hundreds of ways. The Russians claimed that the Ukraine side violated in yearly specific 4,900 ways, but nobody kept it. And now then even that time frame has passed, and now we're on to the last situation here about, is Trump going to walk? He said just a couple of days ago he was going to announce his plan in 2 to 3 days, he said. And I think yesterday was actually the third day. We haven't heard it yet, but right now Steve Witkoff is in Moscow, probably talking to Putin, possibly even as we're making this video right now. So we think that there's a shot there that we could hear something tomorrow. We could hear something Sunday, but probably not much later than Monday, I would wager, that they're going to have something. Because all the time that you have Trump saying, yes, we're going to we're going to have this deal, and here's the terms. We've showed you what at least many of the media is reporting is the 7-point plan, which is things like no NATO. You're going to have to give up the 4 oblasts. You're going to have to. We're going to recognize de jure that Russian territory is now Crimea, and those are the same, and several other kind of things, mineral deal, etc. Now then, according to the New York Times. I think this was yesterday, this is on the 23rd. The New York Times is saying, oh, yeah, and by the way, about all that, the American plan, which would also explicitly block Ukraine from ever joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was rejected by President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. But the United States is essentially settling on a deal that favors the aggressor in the war, one that forces Ukraine to accept the forcible rewriting of its border and give up its hope of ever joining NATO, as well as the other former Soviet republics have done. So you see in that one, you have, first of all, Zelensky just rejecting it, but then you see that this is the second part there is from the New York Times, how they're characterizing things, that they say that the U.S. is settling on a deal that favors the aggressor. And that's a theme that we keep seeing a lot here. And it's not that Trump is favoring the aggressor. It's that he's acknowledging reality, which still to this day, whether it's the New York Times, whether it's some general officers we have, whether it's a lot of the other media, obviously many in the European Union, some of the Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, Kaja Kallas, Ursula von der Leyen, Macron, Keir Starmer. I mean, you just keep going down the list. All the A-listers, so-called in Europe, everybody seems to be on this thing that we don't want to agree to anything that's going to have to give away anything. Now then, about 1 hour ago, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, gave, I think, a veiled, I won't say threat, but he gave an answer to following up what the New York Times reported there about whether he would actually agree to that. And again, this is from, now 2 hours ago. So this is very, very fresh here. And you have Zelensky saying, yeah, about your terms.
Найближчими днями можуть відбутись дуже вагомі зустрічі, які повинні наблизити тишу для України. Потрібне безумовне припинення вогню. Потрібен реальний тиск на Росію, щоб вони сприйняли або американську пропозицію припинити вогонь і рухатись до миру, або нашу пропозицію, будь-яку, яка справді може спрацювати і гарантувати надійне, негайне та безумовне припинення вогню. А потім достойний мир та гарантії безпеки. Дипломатія повинна спрацювати.
Okay, so diplomacy must work. And he doesn't just want a ceasefire. He wants an unconditional ceasefire. He wants security guarantees for himself. Everything that Trump is not offering. So if you're President Trump, you have to imagine, what are you going to think when you see that? You see so many in the West still saying, yes, continue arming Ukraine. Yes, continue giving them some kind of security guarantees. Let's have this coalition of the willing, get ready to go in there. And now that you have 2 hours ago, President Zelensky saying, I want my terms. I want a ceasefire. I don't want to give up anything. And he has reiterated and repeated this comment that we've shown a couple of times from earlier this week, where he says specifically about Trump's comment that there has to be a de jure acknowledgement that Crimea is Russian territory. He said, yeah, that ain't happening either. It's my territory, period. There's nothing else to even discuss. So now Trump, who said that either at the first of this week, both himself and his senior officials, either we're going to have an agreement that both sides agree to, both Russia and Putin, Russia and Ukraine, or we're going to walk. That's what J.D. Vance flat out directly quote said, or we'll walk. Now then you have Zelensky here literally telling Trump, are you going to do it or not? You going to walk or not? Because I'm not doing what you said. So if the standard for Trump is, okay, either people agreed or I'll walk, now his bluff has been called. It's like a high stakes gamble. And you have Zelensky there who said, bam, puts his cards on the table. I call. Are you going to walk or are you going to keep going here? Because I'm not agreeing to your terms. Trump is now in a really, I think, a pretty tough position. I don't think he wants to walk away. I think he wants people to just agree to it, because I think he really does mean that, which he said tons of times about how he wants the killing to stop. He's using this figure of 5,000 Russians and Ukrainians a week are being killed, which probably means another, 15 or 12,000 are being wounded on top of that. So you're talking somewhere around 20,000 total casualties per week. It may well be higher. It's probably a lot more on the Ukraine side than the Russian side, based on the firepower advantage on the Russian side. But now then Zelensky's saying, no, I'm not going to do that. That's where he's at right now. So Trump will now have to decide if he's going to be a man of his word or if he's going to back down, because that's the position that Zelensky has put Trump in right now. He either has to make good on his threat and walk, or he's got to back down. And everybody will know it. Europe will know it. Putin will know it. Everybody else on the planet will know it. If he doesn't walk now, then that means Zelensky won. Even if Trump doesn't give any new money, if he just, and if he doesn't walk, he doesn't stop, then now his word's not going to mean anything and nobody's going to pay attention. I don't think this is a place Trump is in very often, that he thinks that people don't actually value constructive concerns about his word, or that they fear it. So because of that, I think it's probably pretty likely that Trump is going to say, okay, you called my bluff and you did it publicly, then now I'm going to make good on what I said. We're done. And of course, that's what I think he should do, because I think that this is not even an issue of who's right or who's wrong or who's strong or who's not, etc. This is an issue that has to do with this war. Zelensky has unequivocally, absolutely confirmed that he is not able to deal with reality, that he will not make any concessions on the ground that will bring the war to an end. And he is also, while he's basically taunting Trump to his face, he's doing the same thing with Russia, because you've seen, we showed the Ambassador Polyansky yesterday or this morning on the show, where he said, if we don't get the deal we're looking for, we'll keep going. You've had Sergei Lavrov say the same thing. Putin has said the same thing. We're interested in having the root causes of this thing adjusted. We'll keep fighting until we get that. He said that many, many times. They've never changed on their messaging, by the way. So there's no reason to think that they're going to change now. So what Zelensky is signaling to Putin is that, okay, we're willing to do it. Negotiations or war or combat. And if you prefer combat, we're fine with that. We'll keep going. And you've seen on our earlier show today, Sergei Lavrov is very calm and very professional about this. And he'll go down that path, and they'll do whatever they need to do to accomplish their political objectives. And so I think that's pretty much what we're going to see. There are others also in Ukraine that echo what their president said, and the mayor of Kiev, Klitschko, who is a very well-known figure that really is sometimes been a little bit at odds with Zelensky, but over minor issues, but more or less that they're in lockstep. And he was asked whether he thought that Ukraine would give territory in order to get peace. Now, as you watch this clip here, note the very direct way that the reporter asked the question, and notice how Klitschko seems to be about to answer it and then kind of waffles, and she brings it back, and watch where he ends.
Do you think that Ukraine will have to give up territory to reach a ceasefire?
It's a very difficult political decision to give up our territory to Russia. It's not a solution. It's not fair.
Would you consider it if it brought peace?
It can be difficult decision for President Zelensky. He have to find solution. It will be a painful solution for the peace, but I guess we never accept occupation of Russia.
So you think it might have to happen?
Temporary, it happens, but for long term, to accept the whole territory, whole Ukraine not belong to Ukraine anymore, belong to Russia. I guess Ukrainian people never accept that.
So Yeah, he says, listen, it's not fair. And listen, I don't want to be too harsh on this. As I was watching that video earlier today, I put myself in his position. Let's say that I was the mayor of a major American city, and a portion of our country had been occupied by an invading army. And the only way to end the war was to cede part of the United States of America. It would be anguishing. I don't want to minimize that. And I think sometimes I may come off doing that. And I want to just kind of stop and say, I recognize how hard it is. And you can see all over Klitschko's face, just to answer the question is just detestable to him. And I totally get that. But only up to a certain point. Because in that scenario I drew there, the leadership has to make a very hard and right call if it's going to be the leadership of the remainder of the country that is not under occupation, the remainder of the country that is under your control. You have got to make the hard call, because if you don't agree to these very draconian terms that there's no way to put a better face on it, that's what they are. They're awful. They're ugly from the Ukraine side. Not to agree to that, though, diplomatically, means that you're going to let the other side, which has the imbalance in the power in their favor, settle it on the ground. And that means that you're going to lose much more territory than you've already lost. And that there are going to be possibly hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainian men who died, men who you're going to desperately need to rebuild your country. And for the lives of those who are still alive, you have to make these hard calls, because to keep going with what your heart tells you, what your emotion tells you, what's fair, all it's going to do is get more people unnecessarily killed. And of course, I've made this statement before, but it bears repeating here. The only reason we're in this ugly situation now is because we have jettisoned and rejected every diplomatic off-ramp that ever existed from before the war started and at various points through it. This is the pain and the price that we're paying, that the Ukraine people are paying, but collectively our side is paying because of our unwillingness to do the right thing, the logical thing, the rational thing early. And if we do one more time, fail to take this ugly deal here, then the result is going to be even more catastrophic. And I don't think that Russia is going to stop. If this deal goes off the table, Trump walks, I doubt that Russia's willing to talk anymore. I think it'll be like it was in the latter stages of World War II, to where even if you had the Nazi regime in Germany saying, okay, actually, we're willing to talk, like before the fighting had gotten past I think the Bug River was the border at the time. I don't think that the Soviets would have. They said, yeah, it's too late for that. We're going to keep rolling. And we've certainly seen that at other times in the past. So I kind of think that's where we're at right now. But for Klitschko and the Ukrainian leadership, it is a very, very bitter pill to swallow and very difficult. Someone for whom it's not very difficult, though, someone who doesn't have to pay any price, though, is a number of Americans. And certainly I could have pulled some Europeans out here, but this is just anguishing for me to watch for a different reason, because I keep seeing these well-known, famous Americans, many of whom are four-star generals, four-star admirals, like the next guy I'm going to show here, that are just talking purely from emotion and preference, just don't even care about what the ramifications of, if their words are followed, means on the ground to the Ukraine side, because it ain't costing them anything. It's not costing their blood. It's not costing their brothers or sister, and it's not their territory that has to fall. So while you saw Klitschko agonizing over what he knows is the right thing, you have to give territory to stop it. You don't see any of that on Admiral McRaven's face when he was asked, what should Trump do about having these negotiations with Vladimir Putin?
I applaud the president for trying to end the war. But I would offer to him that, one, you need to know who you're trying to negotiate with. I mean, Vladimir Putin is a dictator. He kills his political opponents. Generals fall out of 15-story windows. So if you think he's going to be true to his word, then you misunderstand who the man is. So this idea that somehow we're surprised that Vladimir Putin has lied to Trump really shouldn't surprise anyone. Zelensky, on the other hand, yeah, he's not a perfect man, but he was democratically elected. He's the president of Ukraine. And he has shown, in my opinion, tremendous courage in being a wartime leader in a country that has held off the Russians for several years now, when, initially we thought Russia would be in Kyiv in about 3 weeks. So misunderstanding the people you're negotiating with is something he needs to get right up front before you can kind of continue with the negotiations.
Okay, Walk through the logic with me here. So Admiral McRaven is saying two really important things. Number one, he's saying that Vladimir Putin is a liar and a dictator, ergo you can't believe anything he can say. Now, how can you have any negotiated settlement, period, of any sort if you're going to assume that he's lying about everything? You can't. You forestall it. It's not even possible. And what does that even mean? That because Putin is, in your estimation, a bad guy, a villain, and evil and wicked and all that kind of stuff, that you shouldn't talk to him? But if you do talk to him, and if you do accept that he's a liar, where do you go with that? How do you know? How do you have any kind of discussion at all? See, it's illogical and irrational, even in the context of what he's saying there. But he's saying with all this, pomp and circumstance of being an admiral. And he's written this book, and the anchor there was just praising him up one side and down the other at the beginning. This just made me sick. But that's just where we are. We worship the 4 stars or the admiral's the title of admiral on his uniform or whatever these pictures he used to have, and we're oblivious to what he's done, what he said, and how ridiculous it is at face value, much less if you actually examine it. The second thing he said there, oh my God, Zelensky is a great wartime leader? Are you kidding me? It is insane how bad of a wartime leader he's been. He has made just operational and strategic error after another and gets all of his people killed in large numbers, refuses to make the hard choices that could have protected and saved his people. I mean, let's just go down the list. We can start off on Mariupol. He left that too long and would not allow his troops to leave, and ended up having, I think, close to 10,000 that were either captured or killed after it was surrounded, instead of having them withdraw when it made more sense, and kept them all alive for further combat operations. He lost the city anyway, and he lost the men. That was the first one. And then it continued on with Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, of course, the big one in Bakhmut, where there was allegedly 70,000 people when the city was clearly lost. And he continued to just shove a meat pin into that grinder and just threw tens of thousands of them away, troops that they will never be able to get back. Men that were experienced and had been trained, that if they had kept them alive, they could have had a much more effective force. But he didn't learn anything there. And then when Avdiivka followed on with that, same kind of situation there. And then he launched this ridiculous attack into Russian territory in Kursk, and over 7 months lost another 75,000 people. And in the end, gained absolutely nothing. The attack on the Dnieper River in 2023 on a place called Krinky, where they had this big operation that looked good on paper, looked good in the Western media, but did nothing but just throw just scores and scores of Ukrainian men into a death trap, which I called it from the beginning. I said, this is absurd. There's nowhere for them to go, but they just continued on. I forget how many months it was. And again, tens of thousands of people went to certain deaths. And at the end of the day, they went back to like it was before, just like with Avdiivka. Just like with the Kursk, just like with this ridiculous thing they're doing in Belgorod. None of these things accomplish anything. And he's the guy that's in charge of all that. And that's who Admiral McRaven calls a great wartime leader. The track record is grotesque. And you call him a great wartime leader, which calls very much into question your analysis, your assessment, and your credibility. So why would I listen to anything else you say when you have just proven how bad and terrible your advice is? Now, it could be that he's aware of everything I said and just doesn't care, and just because that's the narrative he wants to go on, which might be even worse, because then we can't even trust you. You talk about somebody who's lying, either your advice is insanely bad or you're lying. One or the other. There's no other way on this one, because the evidence is grotesque and it's overwhelming. So for you to say that means either you're a terrible assessment or you're lying. I don't know which it is, but it's so ironic that you're then telling that Putin is the guy who lies and Trump shouldn't listen to him. We shouldn't listen to you, and I hope that we don't ever have to listen to that again. I know he'll be going on other networks because that's what they do. They fawn over people who had 4 stars on their chest. Then we want to look at somebody else here. This is now an academic who's from New York University, and we're going to love to just flock to people who say the stories that the modern narrative wants to hear and what's popular. And this guy here from New York University is going to say the same thing, except that he's going to go a little further. And as it turns out, Putin's actually losing.
They'll tell you that Putin is doing pretty poorly and that the Russian economy is not in the sort of place that could continue this war for long. And so when I see President Trump announce that he's going to come up with a deal, I don't understand why he doesn't push forward with more weapons and more supplies to Ukraine in order to push that deal forward, whatever it is. So it's very confusing because on the one hand, Trump seems to offer carrots to Putin, carrots that Putin hasn't asked for, while withdrawing the stick. I haven't actually read The Art of the Deal. That might be how you're supposed to do it, but I'm not sure.
See, and what he's repeating here is something that we point out a lot, and I'll put this in there to show you it hasn't lost any of its virility, and that is that Russia is losing. They're barely hanging on, and here's all this evidence. And then I just don't understand why Trump is just willing to give away all this land, why he's willing to give away the Crimea and all this and ask for the war to end on terms that are only favorable. Why didn't he put pressure on him? Because Trump recognizes he's one of the very few in the West that recognizes reality. I mean, I would love to be able to put my mic back in that guy's face after he said that statement and said, could you please explain how Trump has leverage to play on him when the predecessor of Trump bent over backwards to give 10,000 military vehicles of various types, billions and billions of dollars, ammunition, 500 million rounds of ammunition. I forget the number. I think 7 or 8 million artillery rounds of various calibers. All this stuff, interceptor missiles, air defense missiles, long-range missiles, artillery system. I mean, you name it. All this kind of stuff, and it didn't put pressure on Ukraine, Russia to do anything. All these sanctions that we put in there, he mentioned that as well. All these sanctions we've done to cripple the Russian economy, they grew 4% last year. You see anybody in Europe that grew 4%? And while the Russian economy does have high inflation and several other indicators that are not exactly great, overall, especially when you look at the quality, the amount of debt that they have, the debt to GDP ratio, way better than ours. So everything that we have already done when there was no hesitation from the White House did nothing but help Ukraine lose. They lost. They continued to lose men. And now then you have Trump coming in saying, what possible rationale would the United States have to come in and say, we're going to double down on what failed the first 3 years? Doesn't make any sense. But see, for some reason, those thoughts don't occur to guys like that. Now, it's one thing if it's an academic. It should be another if it's a guy who actually has a career in the military. But again, there seems to be some kind of deal to where if you get 3 and 4 stars, you, for the most part, detach your brain. And I almost hesitate to show it because we showed General Jack Keane a lot, but man, he is like totally on board with what this guy from NYU suggests.
The administration has got to get real tough with Russia, hit them hard in their central banks and their energy sector with crippling sanctions and robustly arm Ukraine. And that will get Putin's attention more than anything else. Not so Ukraine can continue to fight, but so we can bring Russia to the negotiating table and get a deal.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is going to the next step the United States will have to take if Russia rejects the deal, which I suspect they will.
Yeah, you say Russia's going to reject the deal? Ukraine has rejected the deal. Ukraine has rejected anything. They don't want to agree to anything. So how can you say, Jack, how can you say that we're not trying to win? We're just trying to put pressure on Russia to make them come to a negotiated settlement. I mean, if you know anything about any war that's ever been fought in the history of man, nobody who's on the ascendancy makes a deal that's at the benefit of the guy who's on the lower end of the spectrum. Nobody. Russia is unequivocally up here. Ukraine is somewhere below the table in my assessment here. That's just where it is. So what do you mean when you say that we should put pressure so that Putin will make a deal beneficial to the Western side? I mean, what that we haven't already done? That's a literal number. That's not just an exaggeration. When you count every kind of combat vehicle, whether it's a truck, a supply vehicle, a tank, an artillery piece, etc., all the vehicles that we've given have been exceeded 10,000 from the United States alone. I don't know. I haven't seen the total roll up for all the European nations and the other countries around, but it's probably equal at least. So you're talking 20,000 some odd total military vehicles and millions of rounds of artillery, probably millions of drones. I mean, just everything you can imagine. And Ukraine still loses every day. Every day the land goes further and further to the west. Every day they keep losing thousands, or every week it's thousands and thousands of people. And they don't have as many. Even if the casualties were equal, which they aren't, but if they were, Russia has, according to the Ukraine General Staff, about 8 million men that they can use to draw on for future. There might be another 1.5 million Ukrainians, and that's if they go all the way down to teenagers, get 18 and 19-year-olds, which will just devastate the country, and that won't ever reverse it. That might slow it down a little bit longer. But how insane is it to say there is not, in cumulative total, the capacity on the Ukraine side to ever offset the Russian advantages, to ever reverse it, but we're going to just keep going until all of the resources are dead. It used to be a pejorative to say that, oh, the West is just going to keep supporting the war to the last Ukrainian, and that the Europeans and the United States under the Biden administration to the last Ukrainian. Only now that that's what you're looking for. Except it's the Ukraine side that seems to be willing to go down that path. It's absolutely insane and crazy. Now, on the positive side, I was able to find somebody for the first time today, a former American general that is actually on it. And he was, I think this was Fox News he was on here, and he's one of the few guys that actually says it like it is.
If you take a look at, Crimea, people haven't really talked about Crimea because it was all, like it or not, it was almost assumed like it was lost because that was, 8+ years ago. And so that was sort of new, and I think that frustrated with Trump today. But the point about those lines, we've discussed it. Is that something that you can negotiate out with Russia? There'd have to be some huge carrot for Russia to pull back because there's no possible way military for them to be pushed back. So there has to be something there. But I still think that the lines are going to be negotiated where everybody has to give a little wiggle here to get something. Demilitarized zone, we discussed that. So that's really going to be the biggest thing to really work out. I mean, if you ask, Putin really wants most of Ukraine from Kyiv, at least east. That's where all the money is. And he still has a lot of troops. So in the long game, Russia dominates this. Unfortunately, Ukraine doesn't have enough people to last, and it's been 3 years.
You see, he gets right to the heart of the matter. It almost doesn't matter how many, even if, say, the European Union just said, you know what, we're going everything. We'll empty out all of our coffers. We'll give them all of our combat equipment, all of our tanks, all of our artillery pieces, everything. You can have it all as though it were yours, and we won't even have a military left. It still wouldn't change the balance because there aren't men on the Ukraine side to use it. And here now, this General Ignazio, and by the way, I'm going to try to get him on our show because it's so rare to find somebody of a former flag officer rank that's actually on camera telling it like it is. So thank goodness there are some of those. I hope that's just a trend that's going to continue on, and these other guys are going to be exposed for being the ridiculous statements that they've made when none of it lines up with reality. But here's at least is one that's coming to that conclusion. But there's going to have to be more, though. It's not enough to have a handful. We need a lot more. But here's where we are right now. The net of all this is this right here. We showed you Ambassador Polyansky, who said what the Russian position is officially on our show, that they will achieve the security that they need and the outcomes based on diplomacy, which they are willing to do under these draconian terms I told you about it, but they're willing to stop there. Or they're going to fight for it on the battlefield. They will get it one way or the other. There's no third way for them. It's either this deal or this method, and it's going to be military. You just heard General Ignazio there. He comes to the same conclusion I do. The Ukraine side doesn't have the manpower to prevent it. The Russian side has the manpower to make it happen. That's just the reality. So that's the military reality on the ground. And then on top of that, you have Zelensky, who has refused Trump's offer. According to the New York Times, according to really what we showed you from a couple of hours ago, he said, yeah, I'm looking for my deal. I'm not looking for Trump's deal. So I'm not playing on that. You have the European Unions continue to reject that anything that Trump is trying to do. Mark Rutte was in the White House a couple of days ago and made a statement afterwards that Yeah, Putin is the aggressor, and we need to just keep on doing whatever we need to do to make sure he doesn't succeed. Not agreeing to Trump's deal about we need to end the war, and it needs to talk about these 4 territories plus Crimea. No one in the West is even wanting to talk about that. You have Trump saying, we either this deal that I'm offering here is accepted or I'm going to walk. And then you have the Russian side saying, we're just going to win one way or the other. So it's almost like a boxing ring, and you got 4 players. You got the Ukraine side here, you have the European side here, you have Trump here, and you have Putin over on this corner. And they're all very far apart. Maybe you can say that the Putin and the Trump side are a little kind of closer together, but even there's some still major gaps between them. But between Trump and Europe and Trump and Zelensky, it's all the way across the ring. And so what is that going to mean going forward? I mean, it's pretty clear. Russia has the means. They have the will. They will either get it this way or they'll get it militarily. Ukraine has the desire, but they don't have the capacity. So they don't have the ability to go down that path. So either they agree to this ugly deal that is even worse than the one Trump is offering, or that just inertia will like take it down this. And there's actually I saw there was a, let's see if I've got it here handy. Yeah, there was an ex post by Yulia Mendel. She's the former press secretary for Zelensky. She posted earlier today some of the issues here that are on terms for this deal for the Ukraine side. The ceasefire said a permanent ceasefire, both sides immediately engage in technical implementation. Ukraine receives robust security guarantees. Ukraine will not be in NATO, but it can go in the European Union. And then I talk all the issues about the territory, the 4 areas, etc. And then the economics. U.S. and Ukraine will implement the economic cooperation and minerals agreement. Ukraine will fully be reconstructed and compensated financially. Sanctions on Russia will come down, but the U.S. economic cooperation will go forward some other areas. So some of those things are actually pretty good for Ukraine, and they're saying no. He is rejecting those. And so, it's interesting. I looked at some of the comments under there, but some of the people responding, they're saying, well, good. That's what it is. What a dumb thing to accept to. But let me just tell you something. There's going to come a day when the Ukraine people would think it's a fantasy to get something this good. What I'm describing right now here on the 25th of April, 2025, as being an ugly deal. It's represented by here because it does require a great many bad things from the Ukraine side. If they don't take that ugly deal and it goes down this other, it'll never be this good again, folks. It'll never be this good again. This is as good as it's going to get as the payment for our unwillingness to do things that made sense earlier on. And so now then, we're going to have to wait and see, because the one guy who has the power over all this is Volodymyr Zelensky, the guy in this corner of the ring. Putin said, I'm going to do either this or that. But Trump is saying, this is what I want to happen. European Union is saying, well, this is kind of what we want to happen. But everything hinges on what this guy's going to do, because he can either say yes to this ugly deal or he can say no to this. And then he's going to be on his own, because Putin will go either this path or that path based on what he says. Trump will either go down a diplomatic path or he'll go on his own path based on what Zelensky says. Europe is just kind of like bystanders. They're just watching to see what happened. They don't have any leadership of any sort. So really, we're going to be watching very closely 2 things in the coming days, and we'll come and let you know the minute that we hear either of these 2 things. Either Trump is going to come out and say, I warned them, I told them, they didn't listen, I'm walking. I meant what I said, here I go. And then that will be the trigger for Putin. They'll say, okay, diplomacy is now off the track, and the train is now moving down the military to a decisive outcome. And I don't know how long that would take, but with Trump walking and them losing anything future of that, and especially the psychological impact, I would wager it wouldn't be too long. Maybe some number of months, a short number of months. I doubt it would be a year or more. But you never can tell how those kind of things go. But the end is certain. Whether it's a month, 3 months, 12 months, it's definitely going to be over there. And then we'll just watch as it slow bleeds out. And that's how it's going to work out. So as soon as we either hear Trump say he's going to walk, or we hear Zelensky say, I'm going to agree to it, then that'll tell us where this is going to go. But I think you all know where I expect it to go. It's going to be on this track right here, where we're going to make one final error as a collective West. We're going to reject this last chance for diplomacy, and there are going to be thousands more Ukrainian men who are alive as I'm making this video who will not be alive at the end. There will probably be hundreds of square kilometers of territory that right now are Ukraine that could remain Ukraine under this deal that they'll reject and end up losing that too. And they'll probably never get it back, at least not in our lifetimes. We'll have to wait and see how it goes. But that's the situation for today. I appreciate you guys staying up with us here kind of late-ish on a Friday afternoon. But a lot of this stuff was just breaking, and I thought you needed to know it. And we'll continue to keep you abreast as things develop over the weekend and beyond. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.